Good evening, all. My name is David Balford. I'm a local writer, sometimes poet. And I've written my memoirs that I call Take a Little Walk with Me, a Life in Remembrance. It's a mouthful, but it's been a long life, and I've written about it. Welcome to Tapestry Tuesday. This is the Literary Arts Guild presentation this month. Hopefully you'll enjoy an hour going through my memoirs. You may be wondering what I'm prepared to talk about this evening, and you're not alone. There are many ways to address this topic of memoir writing and the craft itself, and I'll go through a few iterations with you. Please feel free to ask any questions as we go. This is, I hope, is a conversation rather than a lecture. I don't do lectures very well, so let's call this an open invitation to share in the discourse. The photo you see on the screen is of Boston and Maine railroad tracks taken by me in 1970. Reflective of the road that I would soon walk. And I spent many an afternoon exploring the woods surrounding these tracks as a boy in search of who I was and the person I would ultimately become. Can you hear me? I'm not sure this thing is on. Is that any better?
That sounds fine.
Better? Okay, good.
It just sounded the train coming.
Yeah. Okay. So I invite you. That's the
Given the size of the room, we might hear you better without the amplifier.
You're probably right. Turn it down. Okay, I'll turn it off.
We can hear you though, David.
We hear you. Good. So I invite you to come along on a journey with me of my life through the places, people, and times that became inspiration stories I'm about to tell. But first, I'd like to talk a little bit about what a writer does, a little bit about memoirs, and see whether we can make some sense of the craft itself. This is something that actually I was in Nancy Maracio's class some years ago. She said, write a little bit about yourself. This is what I wrote. But in order to really write your memoirs, I think you've just got to be a writer in particular. And who can be a writer? Anybody who can string two sentences together coherently can be a writer. And I'll get into that in a bit. So an artist has an easel, canvas, paints, stains, stone, and graphite too. This writer has a faltering recollection of times that were, worlds that could be, events that never were, but may in time evolve. Then there were moments of fleeting thoughts that somehow make their way to scribbled notes, leading to more polished phrasing in one or more drafts, written sometimes late into a darkened evening's toil. Still, there are elements of present, grandchildren, siblings, neighbors, cousins, friends, and more. They too demand their place in thought. The transitions to upbeat story, humorous vignette, and reportage. The present being all there really is in life, has its place in a writer's toolkit as well. The writer immortalizes the present, those who populate it, new times and retellings of what is constantly morphing into a nether region, referred to as the future, nature's perpetual sleight of hand. So that's a little bit about who does the writing. What I want to talk about is, what is a memoir? Why are we here? What is this all about? Merriam-Webster talks about a memoir being a narrative composed from personal experience. Pretty stripped down, not much meat on the bone there, but it tells what you need to hear. The author Abigail McCarthy talks about every memoir reminds us of the far away and long ago, lost, changed persons and places beyond recall. The concept of memoir has been around forever, but The terminology memoir has been around since 1571, still quite a while. This is how I define a memoir. Remembering the past and the present, recalling the actions, people, and places that made us who we are, who we've become. So why write your memoir? A lot of reasons, and it is particular to any individual as there are people. To remember the people, places, and things that made us who we are today. So, remembrance, in memoriam, to honor those elements that shaped our personality. I remember as a freshman in high school, we had this little tome that the teacher would pull out once a week, and it was, "It's your personality." And I always remember that, like, well, who's else would it be? So everybody has their own personality, and so as a result, you see the world differently, and you record it there. That's really what this memoir thing is about. And then to pass along to our descendants an image of the person we started out being, events, people, and places that molded us, the person we wish to leave in family legacy. That's the one that grabbed me. And I've been doing a lot of researching of my own predecessors, and it's been a real adventure as that goes. So how do I write a memoir? Well, again, it's as there are as many ways to write as there are people. But I like going back and talking to my ancestors while they were still alive. I was fortunate enough to record my mother while she was still living, and she revealed a lot of things I'd never heard before. I got it on record that I passed along to the rest of my siblings and so forth. Research and record your family history with diaries, journals, the internet, etc. Ancestry.com has been a major resource for me, as for many people that want to dig into their past and who came first and so forth. Take seminars, courses on writing well, about memoir writing and how to become a better writer. AIL is a fine resource for that, right down the street at Colby Sawyer. I belong to as other people in this room belong to a Tuesday memoir writing class at the Council on Aging, right down the street. Again, it's a resource that is free, it's available, and it's invaluable. Okay, so take seminars, courses on writing, read books, articles on memoir writing and how to begin. You can see there's several selections that I called out of the stacks just before this meeting. There are scores of books written on how to write a memoir, and they've all got insights. So I generally thumb through them and take some notes, and I keep my own record of how to write a better memoir. Okay, make lists of your earliest remembrances. Begin writing brief sketches, expanding your stories as you go. Back in 1976, my new wife at that time gave me this, and I said, "It's empty." She says, "Fill it," and I did. And I wrote for the next 3 or 4 years about our early life together, people we knew, the friends we made, places we lived. It's invaluable. When I filled this one up, she gave me another one. After that, I was on my own. So that's one way of recording your reminiscences or your memoirs. The other one is this. I just sketch, doodle, write. And after a while, this becomes the means of a story. And I recommend that to anybody who's interested in trying their hand at writing their memoir. Okay, this one is a direct quote out of my memoirs. It's in the forward. Contained in this book is a recollection of remembrances, real or imagined, a lifetime spanning 7 decades. It is impossible to determine what separates fiction from fact, but the outcome is about the same. It really depends on your definition of truth, and how much you want to stress. Yes, sir.
I've never found the time to write the book, but I've sold a great many excerpts. And my editor every once in a while questions me about, did it really happen that way? And my answer has always been, what formed my values is what I remember as having happened, which may or may not be an accurate report of what actually happened. And I've usually managed to compromise with him by, he says, putting a sentence that warns the reader of that.
Oh.
But when you say remembrances real or imagined, the imagined ones are often important as what makes you tick as the accurate ones, in my experience.
Thank you. Okay, this is the foreword of my book, and I'll go through this quickly. But this tells you how I started thinking about doing my memoir. This memoir began in 1962 when I was 14 years old, living in Braintree, Massachusetts, an unremarkable Boston suburb that grew in population and importance as I matured. I remember walking rusty Boston and Maine railroad tracks, ones you saw before, one snowy morning after Christmas to road test a pair of suede chukka boots received as a gift from Santa. After walking the 2-mile distance from Middle Street overpass to the Manattaquot River Junction in my new boots, I recall exasperation rising in me as I felt icy cold slush seeping through the seam of my prized waterproof boots. This is the first time that I can remember thinking, this will make a great story to tell my grandkids someday. That is when my thoughts took flight, and I began thinking backward to my earliest days on this planet. And this now really leads into the threshold of thought of my predecessors. And I'd like to introduce you to my grandparents. On the left, you'll see that Vincent and Marcella Valiakonis had this family portrait taken in 1922. They have 3 children at that moment. My father is about to be delivered, so he's actually, my grandmother was expected with my father when this photograph was taken. A couple of years prior to that, I'll introduce you to my mother's parents, Anthony and Louise Schlickus, and their first child, my Aunt Joan. They would eventually have a son, Albert, and my mother came along in 1924. Unfortunately, my maternal grandmother, Louise, died of sepsis 10 days after my mother was born. So what I find remarkable about these photographs is that these 2 Lithuanian families in South Boston had no idea of each other's existence. Yet they went to the same photograph studio, Stucker Studio on West Broadway, and had their pictures taken 2 years apart, and you'll notice it's the same background. And this is the irony of this is the common thread of the people who came from Eastern Europe at the beginning of the 20th century, settled in various communities. This happened to be South Boston, but this is an amazing parallel universe that got fused together when their children met in 1942, and these families became one. I'll read you this. For the sake of time, I'll try to make this a little bit truncated. When census value, I call this coming to America the way it might have been. Might have been. But I took the facts right out of Ancestry and different documents that came into my possession. When Sentus Valiakonis arose before dawn to be on time to meet his friend Jacob, who was to provide him with a wagon ride to downtown Allen, Lithuania, when Sentus's place of birth. It was March 15th, 1913, and was fast approaching August 22nd, Vincentus's 20th birthday. If all went well, Vincentus would spend his upcoming birthday in the United States of America as a new immigrant in a foreign land. Vincentus planned to board the train from Aloft to Vilnius, where he would take a connecting train to Antwerp, Belgium, to make third-class passage aboard the SS Lapland on March 22nd, 1913. The Lapland was a two-stack coal-burning steam ocean liner built in 1909 for the Belgian Red Star Line. Sailing from Antwerp via Dover, England to New York City, the vessel was frequently utilized by Eastern European immigrants looking to make a new life in America. Vincentus had arranged to travel with his father, Vincentus Sr., but it was decided that the elder would follow later that summer once the crops were mature and he could safely leave the harvest to his remaining children. I talked a little bit then about my grandfather, my father's father, escaping the Russian army, who was right on his heels, the Russian army of Nicholas II and the looming First World War. And then I closed out this way. With all of this in mind, Vincentus greeted his old friend Jonas that morning and clambered aboard the open buckboard for a short trip to Aloft to catch the train leading to his new life away from Lithuania and the modest life he knew. I talked a little bit about my mother's father, similar kind of a background, came over in January 1910. He, in fact, met my maternal grandmother when he was 11 years older than she. So it was a marriage, perhaps of convenience, but it certainly resulted in 3 children and a life, a new life in America.
Do you know how old she was, David?
She was 19 when she came over, and a couple of years later she got married. This is an abbreviated immigration story of my paternal and maternal grandparents, who at very early ages decided to break with their Lithuanian homeland at the dawn of the 20th century for a chance better existence in the uncertain streets of America. It is amazing to think that if any one of them had hesitated to make their brave decision to come to South Boston, had not met their partner in precisely the way that they did, and created offspring, this thumbnail family history would not have been written. More significantly, the author would not be here to assemble this brief but impactful immigration vignette to enlighten future generations for their collective predecessors. So that's a little bit about my grandparents, how they came to America. My parents escaped South Boston in 1950, as many city families did around that time after the Second World War. The suburbs were booming, but yet many of the men still worked in the city. My father did. He and his brother had a cafe on West Broadway in South Boston, and they worked it for 30 some odd years. And this was sort of like the way that I grew up, sort of a foot in both communities. What I'm going to talk to you about now is my early days in Braintree. This is a picture of the house that I grew up in from 1950 to 1961. 4 months after this picture, we moved to the other side of Braintree in a grand house. But that's the way many of the immigrant families worked. They started out, they bought something modest, and they upgraded. So these are some recollections of my youth. This is me at 4 years old in Braintree. And this is something I call recollections of youth. I imagine being 4 years old, standing on the precipice of Highland Avenue East in Braintree during mid-September, viewing brilliant Indian summer sunshine, feeling it radiate soft, warming energy against my young and tender skin. There's a bright blue horizon with large, puffy silver clouds scooting left to right across a wide screen panoramic sky. I'm enthralled with my limited world and celebrate my place in it. Everything is curious and a subject to explore. Fluorescent green grass is turning brown, and I wonder why and how this came to be. Is the wind alive, and where do people go all day as they scurry about on strange but possibly important errands? Where did I come from, and who am I supposed to be? My mind's eye sees it all as it once was, ambling down the street overlooking that old turn of the century era house that I knew as home. My attention is fixed upon a large white painted wagon wheel that has half sunk beneath a grand old horse chestnut tree, residing catty corner to our neighbor's lot. Jim Slauson had installed the interesting memento of earlier transportation times. Many years before, it had piqued my interest in its silent presence. The Slausons' late corn crop stood in quiet vigil upon a great mound that bordered their second acre of property. It was ready for harvesting, so crows and squirrels frequented the lot to claim their fair share of nature's bounty. I remember these early day adventures like they were yesterday. Today, my grandkids have no idea what free, unrestricted play, discovery, and adventure really is. They are overseen, coddled, and managed into play dates that control rather than excite. So I feel privileged with my formative years were a time of character building exploration and self-reliance. Even though that is a world that no longer exists. Perhaps my grandchildren will recall with fondness their first experiences outside of parental oversight, but I doubt it. The world really needs to take a deep breath to examine how we choose to run our lives. Perhaps we will, or at least our grandkids may.
David, what's in the bowl?
What's in the bowl? Snap peas. I'd eat them raw, they were sweet. I can taste them still. Okay, welcome to the family cottage in Carver, Massachusetts. This is where we spent the 1950s. It became the collective for the family. Every family member from the cities, from the suburbs, they all wound up at the cottage for a week to the entire 3 months, every summer.
Where was this thing?
Carver, Massachusetts. It was a small town that bordered Plymouth. Okay, so it's down Cape Way, but it's before the bridge. So what you're looking at here is a structure that was built by foreign immigrants, Lithuanians, who came over after the Second World War, and my grandfather would sponsor them. And he would bring them out to the new land he had just purchased. And they built this over the course of one summer, the summer of 1945. And what you see here is a boat that we'll talk about more, and the stairs there lead up to the screen porch where all the cousins and siblings and friends and many kids as we could pack in there on bunk beds spent their evenings. We'll talk about that a little bit more.
Is it still standing?
I'm sorry?
Is the cottage still standing?
It stands today, yes. I think a couple of different families purchased it, and we've gone by there just to take photographs and not bother them, but just to remember. Okay, cottage days. Our family cottage in Carver was constructed on land occupied by plentiful acres of pine, hemlock, and spruce. They grew thick and tall around the shores of Sampson's Pond. Word was that A.D. Makepeace Corporation owned much of this land on which to grow their cranberry crops in huge bogs that produced red, juicy berry fruit and sheltered great gatherings of frogs, hornpout, bats, snakes, mosquitoes, and bloodsuckers, all first-name acquaintances to growing boys. Every summer, during long, lazy days in June, July, and August of the 1950s, large boy armies of siblings, cousins, and friends invaded the woods surrounding these bogs to harass said critters, wielding an arsenal of weaponry. Slingshots, BB guns, three-pronged spears, and fireworks were the weapons of choice, and were often swapped among the participants for optimum effect. A good afternoon in the bars could yield a dozen frog legs that were toted back to the cottage to be barbecued later that evening. When we would goad each other with comments like "tastes like chicken." Not surprisingly, most of us conquerors would defer to more appetizing hamburgers or hot dogs for supper. I don't recall we had the bright notion that stick fights were a good idea to entertain ourselves. But in late summer of 1960, huge squads of local kids, siblings, and cousins squared off on opposite sides of a dirt country road to begin hurling sticks at each other. This would continue until someone on either side yelled "Relievio," the signal for general ceasefire, until an adult would happen to witness the fracas and put a stop to it. To this day, I am amazed that one or more eyes were not put out during these impromptu missile exchanges. But either fear or good sense seemed to win out. These contests were usually settled by a challenge to see who could be first to jump into the water back at the camp. A strange thing, these adolescent boy tribal rituals. Okay, what you're seeing here is my parents standing in Sampson Pond at the cottage. My father teaching my cousin Greg to swim, and my mother, my sister Laurie. And this is a little story that I put together to kind of capture the flavor. I call "How's the Water?" Dad trot skipped down a tan sandy hill, leading to root beer colored water, defining Sampson Pond. July was in full display, boasting bright blue sky and white billowy clouds migrating east toward Plymouth. Carver, Massachusetts in 1957 was a rural respite from city life in South Boston, and was the summer home for the Ballyconis clan for many weeks each year, providing a playground of adventure for brothers Vinny and David, while their father Vincent toiled each day to make his living at the South Boston Cafe at West Broadway. Early most mornings, as daybreak moved across Sampson Pond, mist wandered down pond from our cottage like a quiet white wall. Fog moved across cool root beer colored water toward Mystery Island, a refuge of blueberries, thickets, and pine trees, where it collected in the cove down by Wally Roman's cottage, melting into the gathering rays of morning sun. Tiny perch began to swim in ripple circles just beneath the liquid surface, feeding on water bugs and low-flying mosquitoes. Bats made their way to cool shaded eaves, seeking a place of upside-down respite till dawn. Water snakes sought their holes on shore, where they slithered silently until evening. Bullfrogs ceased their evening croaking till later that evening, when they would renew their nightly serenade. Today was like most days in summer, arriving in bone-chilling cold out of the screened porch that served as a combination rec room and bunkhouse. It was there where family, friends, cousins, siblings told tales well into the night, escaped mosquitoes under slightly musty-smelling blankets, dreamed of the previous day's boyhood adventures, and wondered what tomorrow would bring. Each day would start as a challenge to see how fast we could locate our dungarees, underwear, and sweatshirts before leaping out of bed into the briskness of an early morning rising. Cold cereal was eaten right out of the individual size wax paper lined boxes, with a splash of whole milk and a few tiny blueberries picked by Grandma the day before. Perhaps a blueberry muffin was available also, depending on Grandma's bake schedule that week. We arose like warriors to greet the day, promising high adventure, risk, and the promise of testing our luck to survive until tomorrow. The day would bring the usual drill. After breakfast, lace up our high-top sneakers, grab fishing poles, and assemble into rowboats that comprised our flotilla. Vinny captained the oversized Laurie Lou, a Titanic lifeboat look-alike, purchased by Grandpa in the late 1940s, when he mustered a few immigrants from Lithuania to cobble together a humble cottage that housed us every summer. David rowed a plywood pram built by Mom's brother, Al, even as his diabetes weakened his sight, but failed to listen lessened his boat building ability. Morning ritual demanded that our crew gather worm bait dug late last evening before bed, load the squirming morsels into the waiting fish hooks, and regale in tales of fish caught during earlier expeditions. Tales of hornpout, kibbe, and perch, and eels sparkled midair as the crew powered both craft out toward Mystery Island, where the big ones surely lay. "1957 was memorable in that Elvis, Everly Brothers, and Johnny Mathis music flowed sweet and loud from portable radios that most teenage girl cousins seem to carry. You Ain't Nothing But a Hound Dog, Kathy's Clown, Chances Are, were all in the air on every boy's lips. Cousin Greg was a walking embodiment of what it meant to be a teenager in the late 1950s. He dressed cool, had a Chicago box hairdo, knew the words to all the cool songs and sang them constantly, with emotion and full command. Having landed at water's edge after a week away working in Southie and sleeping upstairs at Grandma's stuffy apartment, Dad was glad to be there after a 2-hour commute. He had changed into his bathing suit, and moving closer to the pond, his eyes met Mom's in loving recognition. "How's the water?" he inquired. "Delicious, refreshing," was her reply, as Dad plunged headlong into the cool wetness of Sampson's pond. Prose is not all that is contained in memoirs. I choose to use poetry when it makes sense. So I've written a couple of them that I think really describe life at the summer cottage. So the first one is Summertime in the Country. And this is my father's mother. This is Grandma. And you'll hear about her in a minute. Water bugs skittered across blue pond water, making ripples as they go, while flat green lily pads bobbed gently in their wake. Adrift in a plywood pram, I stare intently at the delicate geometry of God's green flotilla, buoyed gently below as a Pipercraft aircraft drones slowly overhead, tracing great majestic circles amidst the winds. The pilot's young face reflects vigor, energy rekindled after fighting the war, taught by teachers at school, but never by Uncle Jerry, who lived it up close and now drinks to forget. Grandma returns from morning picking, toting baskets brimmed with blueberry delight. Her arrival means breakfast of blueberry pancakes, thick syrup, fresh yellow butter, and a week of the same. Plus blueberry muffins, blueberry cake, blueberry pie, fresh blueberries on cold syrup, blueberry blitz. Ended. In August, Grandma assembles her baskets once more to forage for mushrooms, like in the old country Lithuania. She takes her cousin Tekla with her and a bloodhound dog named Zipper for protection in the woods. By noontime, the ladies and their protector return with overflowing baskets of white and brown mushrooms to serve and jar for the cold winter months ahead. I eat no mushrooms until Grandma and Tekla eat them first. We may be sick of blueberries, but mushrooms have no conscience. Some are named death angels for a reason. The next poem, and I'm watching the clock. Immigrants were part of my life as a kid at the cottage. They would come and they would go. They were primarily sponsored by my father's father, and he would give them something to do. They'd have a living, whether it was carpentry or masonry or hauling beer barrels in the family cafe. But they'd all have some job to do. And this is my tribute to the immigrants who came from Lithuania to America. They sang the songs of far away around picnic tables dressed in pretty red and white checkered cloths, in a foreign tongue I did not understand, and drank their beers from musty smelling brown glass bottles that caused their volume to increase, tears to flow from bitter memories of lost loved ones, from swollen eyes that often saw too much, of Nazi green uniformed ogres, then communist gray suited thugs that rounded up Jews to shoot them in the woods, where grandmothers picked their mushrooms, children played their childish games of innocence. They sang the songs of old Lithuania while swaying to and fro with sympathetic meter that marked their pain, defined their fears, that led them to America, rooted them from all they knew, loved, understood, crying in their beer. Out came cold cuts, pickled herring, cold boiled eggs, cloth strained cheese and bulkies, to fortify the one that spoke in hurried cadence, gesticulating wildly, accentuating points that led to knowing nods, sad remembrance, those who did not make it through the hard times, and sympathetic love for those who did. Their singing continued into the night while stars sparkled in the dark country sky above, and mosquitoes buzzed our ears to make their melodies difficult to hear. But worthy of our innocent attention, these voices silent now, the passing of the ages, echo in tribute to those who arrived here before I was born, before I appeared. And there is a picture of Steve. Grandfather used to call him Steve the DP, displaced person. He was a character, and I knew him for 2 or 3 years, and then he simply vanished off the face of the earth. Who knows where he is? Okay. The next one is it's a trilogy, a bit of a trilogy, and actually it's in 4 parts. And with apologies to Don McLean and Vincent Van Gogh, I call it Starry, Starry Night. And it goes like this. Looking up in a still starlit canopy on a dark winter evening in 1957. I'm sorry. There it is. I was greeted by standard Cub Scout favorites twinkling in luminescent brilliance. Orion, Canis Major, Ursa Major, all right where they should be. There was the Big Dipper, and up from that, the North Star, all sparkling like an explosion of jewels affixed to a black velvet backdrop. Planets, stars, moons, constellations, and of course, the object millions craned their necks to see was the 50-pound Russian artificial moon Sputnik, traveling slowly across an open evening sky. I was amazed, not like the cheesy science fiction films us kids watched on Saturday afternoons at the Strand Theater, but with the object trudging bravely across our New England sky, made by man in a Soviet laboratory by real scientists. This was the essence of God's Big Bang creation, just on a far lesser scale. But oh, what wonder. We sat out on Grandpa's pier on a hot, humid July summer evening in 1958. Mosquitoes buzzed our ears, avoiding smoke that curled up lazily from lit punks that hung from our 10-year-old lips. My cousins and I recounted heroic deeds performed that day, teeth clenching reed stems that held glowing embers in feigned bravado. As we sat beneath a far-flung starscape illuminating a night sky high above. Samson Pond below reflected sufficient star glow for us to witness live bugs and bullfrogs navigating a liquid universe beneath our bare feet that dangled above. We were in childhood heaven, surrounded by God's heaven of his own making. Then we saw them off in the distance, just over pine trees that dotted Mystery Island. There were 3 of them, growing in eerie greenish luminescence, hovering menacingly over the island that fired our interest and imagination as we played pirates and buccaneers from rowboats in the full light of day. Now our island appeared haunted, captured by 3 night-traveling glowing objects that circled the wooded landmass like June bugs, only larger. What were these ghostly visitors, and did they mean to do us any harm? No one on the pier moved lest they give away our presence to the lighted things across the water. "Kids, are you out there?" said a voice from the cottage off to our right. Mom was making sure that we were still out there on the pier and out of harm's way. "Mom, we're out on Grandpa's pier watching some glowing lights of a mystery island," I responded. But as the last word left my lips, the 3 lighted objects halted in mid-flight before darting quickly into the humid night air. "Where'd they go?" shouted dumbfounded cousin Jerry. "Look at that," blurted equally puzzled cousin Arthur before we young constellation gazers retired for a night of popcorn, Zarex fruit punch, and an hour of One Step Beyond television before retiring to our bunks out on the swing porch in thoughts of unearthly visitors in the night. Night post in Vietnam during Tet 1970 meant a long, lonely evening with a weapon, a radio, and plenty of idle time of one's thoughts. I'd been at Fan Rang Air Base for 6 months already and growing used to midnight shifts out on secluded listening posts. Tonight I was with Sergeant Bob Smith out on Beach Gate, the post that regulated traffic flow on and off base during daylight hours, but served as only one sentry post among many that circled the base perimeter after duty hours. By midnight, the world was a black hole of darkness, broken by occasional lighted cigarettes from roving Air Force security teams and Korean Army units maneuvering outside the barbed wire fence and concertina wire. Of course, available light was provided by a well-lit moon and billions of stars that were dense, thick, and sparkled in a sea of celestial luminance. I've never witnessed such star display anywhere else like in Vietnam. In a country that had little evening artificial lighting, compete for visual attention, the eye was free to focus on pure starlight from a million different galaxies. While star cover appeared to be a giant cloud that covered the sky with illumination, planets, moons, and major constellations, stood out as navigational beacons for those seeking true bearings on land or sea. Sitting in the darkness with Bob Smith, I watched for any points of light and listened for night sounds that could spell trouble from a hostile enemy. Only routine radio checks broke the evening silence while our eyes eventually acclimated to available nightlight. Hours crawled by on night shift till finally at 5 a.m., purple-red hues illuminated background sky surrounding Fan Rang's hills and mountains, sending chills up the spine of enemies on either side, alerting us that morning was approaching, and with it, the beginning of another duty day. Now in New Hampshire and a lifetime away from high population density and man-made illumination, I am free to enjoy nighttime skies that rival those in Vietnam. I sometimes sit on my porch in a clear summer or winter evening in awe of God's beauty of the stars. The same layered star patterns visible in other sparsely populated areas around the globe are often in view of those living in New Hampshire. This is nature's touchstone with other peoples around the world. We all see the same stars and planets through human eyes that witness God's mysteries on open display. We are all free to marvel, to appreciate, to wonder what it all means during our brief lifetime on this planet. The stars out at night connect us with the times previous and present, people who have lived and are now gone, and with what it is to be human in the universe of neighbors, and the mystery that surrounds us all. This is actually a photo of the moon in Vietnam. It's a little creative license, but there it is. Okay, I think we're at the end here. So I have a little bit to read. then there'll be questions and answers. Yes,
I
never realized, tell me the truth, is Tet an annual holiday in Vietnam?
it is.
I always thought Tet was what happened in 1968, but it's an annual holiday.
It's an annual holiday in February, typically, early February, lasts for usually 2 weeks. It's kind of a combination of Thanksgiving and 4th of July. They have a great party.
The NBA just chose that holiday.
Yes, it is.
68.
Yeah, because they realized that the Americans' guard would be down. Okay, grand finale. Every memoir worth reading deserves a proper ending. This then is mine. It's been an adventure fueled mainly by my spirit, curiosity, and unwillingness to falter or subordinate best effort to frustration or self-doubt. Yes, there's been an abundance of mishaps, fiascos, and failures, the supposed success along the way. But each downfall has presented me an opportunity for re-examination of approach, a renewed effort to do things differently, better. The Wright brothers knew they could fly before they discovered that they couldn't, but then they could. I've approached life's possibilities with ego intact, never realizing I was not born to do everything well. I simply visioned doing new or interesting things and applied reasonable effort to give each fresh event a try. Surprisingly, some events went very well. Then there were astonishing times when I discovered that correct answers in school were not always the same as mine. But persistence was an ally, even if natural school learning was not always on my side. Endurance was the magic that transferred my potential energy to powerful kinetic energy that fuels success in life. I often wondered what it would be like to be one of the smart kids that always had the right answer in class. But then many of my smart friends possessed life deficits different from my own. Life's been a wild and wonderful ride with lots of blind curves, dips, and disruptions along the way. I think of all the endearing personalities I've encountered in 7 decades of living. Some have made an incredible impression upon me, yet faded away long before they should have. Others have endured, but sadly left this world for the next before I really got the chance to say so long. Then there were those that I have known for decades with whom I continue to communicate, while sharing a long and treasured past, with tales of experience accrued along the way. Still, there were those that I've met later in life that provide a rich and varied tapestry of collective experience by which to continue learning. Many of these individuals live in the New London area and share a passion for writing, religion, or the fine arts, painting, vocal theater. These are the people that make life most interesting at this stage, but I cherish all of the personalities I have encountered along life's incredible highway. So in closing, I recognize that this story will never truly end until I join the others that I've encountered along the road leading home. I recall the words of farewell I whispered to my dear father Vincent as he slipped from this life to the next. "I love you, Dad. It's all right to go home," I said. And with that, we passed from this world to God's kingdom. Not a bad way to end things for any of us. Thank you. Questions, thoughts? I got answers.
I love the Wright brothers. My father, of course, always told me, if everything you try works, you haven't tried enough things yet.
That's right.
David, how many times did you rewrite, or did you get it correct first time through?
I'm still in the process. Still in the process. It'll never be done. I'll be done, and then it'll be done.
David, your writing just makes the pictures come alive. The choice of
Well, the picture stuff too.
No, the writing, the action verbs, the descriptors are wonderful. What I wanted to ask is, you began with kind of imagining what it was like for your relatives, and then went to your own recollections. And that's all considered memoir. I mean, if you're thinking about your relatives and imagining what it was like.
Yeah, I think there has to be an underpinning of truth. And it takes some research.
That's, I
Yeah.
see that you based it on research.
Oh, absolutely.
You made it come alive with your own imagination.
Right. I kind of filled in the blanks.
Right.
But I have the documents, so I got them,
Oh, yes.
offline. It's amazing what you can find out if you just, during COVID, I just went crazy. I just did a deep dive.
It's absolutely bizarre, the stuff you turn up, sometimes by accidental luck and sometimes in weird ways. There's a site called, I believe, newspapers.com.
Yes,
That is a remarkable compendium of old newspapers.
yes.
I don't pay for it, but on Mother's Day this year, they let you type in women's names and let them. So I now have a complete list of all the prizes Heidi won in second, third, and fourth grades.
Excellent.
Which were reported in the hometown newspaper.
Excellent. You got the makings of the story. Get yourself a yellow pad and go to work.
Yes, yes, yes.
Thank you for this example that we can take home.
Yes.
We can write it. Yes.
That's right.
What you didn't mention, I've been writing about it for years. I've read several books about it. And what you do so well that I'm having trouble with is to fill in the description. You know, the color. When you were 10 years old, you didn't know what those colors were, what the leaves were like, or the sound front, but you made it up so well. And my problem is that I'm an engineer. All I think of is facts, facts, facts. But you give such great examples of filling in the description.
Yes.
Like
Facts
you
are
were-
good too, you know.
I've done a lot.
Facts are fun.
I've done a lot.
I'm more of an engineering style of writer, computer scientist. Go to Christian Science, csmonitor.com and type in Ortman in the search box, and you'll see the kinds of stuff they've written me about, my attitudes when the first Earth satellites went up, and that kind of stuff.
Yeah, this is a good description, for
Yeah,
example.
I'm no good at the kind of description he does.
It takes some thought and just some practice, but anybody can do it. I mean, I'm not the smartest person in the room, but you just apply effort to research, and you'll be surprised what comes out.
David, I loved your description of the last generation of Pharaoh children, of which we were.
Yes,
And it really kindled in me some thoughts of, and you were hitting all the different points of being on, your own with your friends and your cousins and having the adults on the fringes stepping in every once in a while.
and that's where they belong.
Yeah,
Yes.
I really enjoyed that. Yeah, that was a
Yeah.
great memory.
We had such freedom.
Yeah,
Did you ever get lost in the woods?
frequently. Frequently.
Exactly.
That's why you go out in the woods.
Exactly.
I still
Yes, sir.
do. David, just forgot what I was gonna say.
You'll think.
Hold on. Oh, no, I know what it was. I'm always curious about how writers process what they do. How did you start? And the different, did you go sequentially, or does it pop in and out in terms of the recollections and then you kind of put it together?
What I read about, is absolutely true in 1962, walking down the tracks, leaky boots.
Is that how you started?
That was the spark, that was the genesis.
Ah,
And it's like, this would be a great story to tell my grandkids. And that really did start things. And then I looked backward, and then I just kind of fill in the blanks as I went. Yeah. Yeah.
The way I motivated myself in the early days of it was when I got a stray thought or an idea of something that probably needed to be told or wrote about. I write a sentence or a sentence fragment on a 3x5 card.
Yeah.
And periodically I would shuffle the 3x5 cards. And when two came up together that looked like they reflected on each other in an interesting way, I had a story.
There you go. Yeah, I mean, there are as many ways to write a story as there are stories of people to tell the story.
right.
And the thing is, just be brave. No one's going to fault you for for writing your story. Some will be better than others. What you've seen tonight is some way better stuff, and a lot of terrible stuff. So I just, sometimes I'll drag that out and I'll see whether I can resurrect it and make it better.
Artists do the same thing.
A re-
Yeah, that's interesting.
Another thing you do well that I read about is put your own personality into it, so it's not a biography.
Yes,
Yeah, it's a little theater art, you know. I've always been a ham anyway, so it's kind of a natural extension.
But it's gotta be the person telling the story, not just the biography.
Yeah,
David, would you say that's a skill that you developed over time?
yes, I think so. I mean, you could read some of my early writings in this, and they're not nearly as.
Now, you write sometimes for one of the local papers too, don't you?
Well, my poetry will appear once a month, usually for the John Hay Society. That's about it. I don't think I've written much prose.
David, what I found fascinating, and I don't know if you're aware, but David has a book he's thinking about publishing letters.
Letters from Vietnam, 1971. Yeah.
It's a letter he wrote to his best friend, and the best friend saved him and sent him back to him.
It's wonderful.
And his writing as a 20-year-old is as exquisite as it is in this. You had the gift back then. Someone instilled in you, an English teacher in 8th grade or somebody.
Probably, yeah. Miss Joe, 7th grade. She thought I could write pretty well. Started putting me into honors classes and that sort of thing. So it's sort of like the skill I had.
Yeah. You seem like a natural.
But don't get me into a math class. Oil and water.
Yeah, the immigrant song really paints a picture.
Yes.
Yeah.
That it's like a painting
In words.
in words of your what you witnessed.
Yeah. Yeah, as a kid. I mean, it's stuck. It's stuck. Okay.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.